Greetings, dear listeners. Before we get started, a reminder to head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and consider becoming a paying subscriber if you're not one yet. You'll get access to, among other things, the full conversation, as well as other subscriber-only benefits. And don't forget to give us a like and review on your favorite podcast app. With all that out of the way, on to the show. First point, it's so nice to see Santi again. It's
great to be
Delightful.
Great to be back.
But the other point is Christine, you wanted to talk about frickin' Catholics, and now you're like, I don't know what to talk about frickin' Catholics. So we got two Catholics on here, and like, what are we going to talk about?
We've
That's
got
all.
two Catholics and one Demir.
That's right.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I mean,
Demir
I think...
was randomly baptized in the Catholic Church, if I recall.
No, not
correctly.
Catholic. I
Yeah,
was
that's
baptized
true.
Protestant.
thought-
The Catholics wouldn't baptize me. That's the funny story. They found a Protestant in Catholic Croatia to baptize me. That's the
Huh.
because not
Hmm.
born in the married. They weren't married in the church. I don't know, something like that.
Huh. That...
Anyway,
Okay,
too
that's...
bad.
I'm questionable on that one, but maybe
Croatian,
Santi
it's
knows
hard.
more.
It's hard to Croatian Catholicism. So whatever, like
You know, we
you
could
can claim,
baptize
you can claim
you,
me.
right, Santi?
No, you don't need to. It's a valid baptism no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. Yeah.
The question here is there's been dust ups with our empire. I think it was Ross Douthat's column talked about like the church and the empire. And so stuff's been going on there, and I don't know, like Christine, what made you think about this? Because here, I'll just lay out my stuff. I found it. I think I tweeted something last week about it, which is J.D. Vance rediscovers Protestantism, basically, which is like he left to become a Catholic, and then realizes that why one of the main reasons Protestantism sort of kicks off is that those busybodies in Rome, and so he just like reinvents it again by being like, quiet you pontiff. And so I don't know tell me more about
Bro, I'm so tired of JD Vance and this convert fervor. And I say this as a convert myself.
yeah.
Regular readers may know I converted from Protestantism in college to become a Catholic. But I was just interested in talking about this papal presidential imbroglio because I find it fascinating for this moment that we're in. I mean, first, of course, we have to just like get into Iran, like whatever we've decided to do there. And then this interesting clash between sort of realpolitik, which I have always kind of imagined you, Demir, as one of our foremost promoters of, versus an actual ideal of a moral norm and an ethical limitation on how we act in the international sphere, basically, and how relations between countries in their best sense are supposed to go. So we see that coming to a head in this moment. And then, the different interpretations of religion, religious fealty, that are sort of embodied in the Pope and the Catholic Church and the relationship that Catholics are supposed to have to the Pope. And then, the sort of Protestant and perhaps evangelical inflected Trump administration. And evangelical inflected, I would say, not even necessarily in a religious sense, so much as the Trump administration has tried to ally itself with evangelicals, but may not actually, and I say may as if this is speculative, I don't think it is, has not actually taken on any of their commitments. And they themselves, I think, there's a lot of evidence of figures putting aside their supposed commitments and committing to MAGA instead of, Jesus.
Well, here, let me,
and then,
but,
and I guess,
yeah.
I think just the last the last thing that I find interesting about this whole thing um, is the fact that so many people have found it compelling and interesting and responded um, in unexpected ways to um, old-fashioned blasphemy on the part of Trump, the sort of relationship between Trump and the Pope and who has authority, just the idea of a moral figure entering sort of this international scene. I just find this all very interesting. And so I wanted to hear from both of you. And um, yeah, so what were you going to say, Demir? Then maybe
No, I
I'll
was just
toss
going
it
to
to
say, I mean,
Santi to sort of give us a little bit of a
well,
timeline.
to me, just the question to both of you, maybe just to kick us off, was like, I just go with the blasphemy first, because that was like that was the real juicy part. Like, I mean,
It's
I mean,
crazy.
it's just wild, and it's not just even on Easter Sunday dropping f bombs. That was good stuff. But like
Also
yeah.
praising Allah, which
I know.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry, I
so
wish Shadi was here
that
for
was
us.
that was
Every
that was
religion.
yeah,
Well,
that was
I will tell you this about the blasphemy.
yeah.
He had already, like a few months ago or a year ago, there was a picture of Trump, like somebody used AI to make a picture of Trump as the Pope, like dressed in the Pope's
Mhm.
garb, and some Catholics got upset, and but you know that only upsets Catholics. The fact that this latest meme mocks Christ himself really helped complicate American politics because evangelicals cannot. I mean, they have to be offended by that as well because they also believe in Jesus. Like, it's like if you make fun of the Pope, that's fine, but if you make fun of Jesus, that
Well,
affects everyone.
so that's
Although,
I guess,
although even then he had some defenders,
and
I
that's
think,
what I haven't been following the
the
story that
Babylon B
closely.
guy.
Yeah, so I mean, did anyone defend that? Because I'm not following it that
Well,
closely.
well,
I can't
let's-
imagine that
the-
was
the-
Yeah,
defensible.
The meme is the
defended
least.
that?
The meme's
I,
the
The
least.
Babylon
I
Bee.
well,
thought-
the Babylon B, former Babylon B editor, who's been
oh,
opining a lot about issues involving Catholics and MAGA, and then Ali Beth Stuckey, I think, was like, "Well, I forgive him. I don't think he knew what he was doing."
okay, so
There
forgiveness.
were-
That's
yeah,
very
there
Christian.
were a
That's
few
nice.
people that-
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
that was an interesting thing because someone else pointed out, I think Chris Hale, who writes a lot about the Pope and has his own motivations. I mean, he's run for office before, but noted that a lot of the sort of evangelical influencer types, like Ali Beth Stuckey, this Babylon Bee guy, also sort of posted in the same, using the same lines, like as like they had received PR lines where it was just like, oh, Donald Trump, you know, this was a mistake. He just needs to use more discernment in future posts. And like they were all saying the exact same thing at the same time, which was like a little weird.
Trump could have used discernment, years ago. He could have started using more discernment years ago. No, I mean, look, I think what's interesting here is that you have a much more dramatic and real-time clash between the Pope and the president over a war, which we also had during the Iraq war, but that was before social media, and it was not as dramatic, and the Pope didn't speak English at the time. But if you recall Iraq, Pope John Paul II was very much against it. President George Bush had as his counselors a lot of Catholics, including Father Richard Newhouse, who was a very important Catholic intellectual at the time. And in fact, the Pope John Paul II's greatest boosters, George Weigel, who wrote his biography, Richard Newhouse, who edited First Things magazine. They loved John Paul II. They celebrated his thought in the United States, except all of a sudden this war came and the Pope was against it. And they had to sort of reinterpret what the Pope was saying or explain why certain things the Pope said could be dismissed while other ones couldn't be. And because they wanted to defend the war and because they supported Bush's policy. But John Paul II kept saying no to war. And not only that, he entered, I think the Vatican entered into negotiations with Iraq and the United States. Tariq Aziz visited the Vatican. I think Christopher Hitchens said the Pope should have listened to his confession because he committed a lot of mass murder, which is true. But so yeah, you had that. But this is like a repeat of that, but in a lot more intense real time because you have the Pope talking directly to reporters in English. And then you have J.D. Vance tweeting and telling reporters that the Pope needs to be very careful when he talks about theology. But I want to clarify, just preface one thing. My understanding of being Catholic after Vatican II is that you're a modern man or woman. You're informed by the faith, but you don't have to be talking about church stuff all the time, talking about the Pope. I don't know if it's weird to non-Catholics to see how much we obsess over the Pope on Twitter. It's like, what did he say? Is he on my side? Is he on your side?
Well,
It's
no,
like,
but okay, but
but I get embarrassed a little bit, but this is important because it's War and Peace,
but it's
and I do
also
have a lot to say.
it's American Pope though, right? Like, I mean, this is
Mhm.
a moment. Like, it was a whole big to do. Like, he's also, I mean, you're right. Social media. He's social media literate. He's on Twitter. People really liking his stuff. Like, he's before this, it was just kind of, like, you're a nice little dose of good Christian morality. Not very heavy. Just like this, that, the other thing. Think of the poor, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone feels good, goes about their day, and then.
Yeah.
Now it's different. I mean, I just like point out one thing. What you're pointing out about Iraq, though, right, is that in a way, right, it's not that different. Like, whatever, J.D. Vance and all the other people around him trying to interpret and say, stay in your lane, or, we love the Pope, but, et cetera, et cetera. But it really, the difference is Trump. Who's
So, okay.
just like an unhinged,
Yeah, I know. Well,
an
that's true.
unhinged lunatic.
Yeah.
That's one part. And the other part is that, like, this is really the first war that the administration's not even bothered to try and come up with a
Mhm.
rationale for it. I think that's the other part of it. It's
Okay.
like you can have an argument about any of these things, but this war, there's no freaking argument for anything. Like, they're just making it
let's-
up as they go.
Okay, so this is my argument that I don't think I've seen any other Catholic make. Why this war is actually not that different from Iraq
Hmm.
to the Vatican's eyes.
Hmm.
Okay,
Sure.
so everyone that you see talk about this topic, whether they support the war or are against the war, they're like, well, the Pope is talking about just war principles,
Mhm.
and according to the application of those just war principles, the Iran war, to his eyes, doesn't meet them.
Wait, can you back
And-
up for just 1 second and explain just war principles for our audience who's not familiar?
Okay, so in the Catholic tradition, in the philosophical tradition more broadly, there is this sort of school of thought which tried to lay down principles for the possible justification of war. And you find the beginnings of that in Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine. But you get it more systematically treated in Aquinas. And basically, it's a few things like he divides them into 3 areas: justice before the war, justice during the war, and justice after the war. It has to do with proper, like, it has to be in self-defense. It has to be proportional to the, I mean, there's a few criteria there. I don't have them off the top of my head. But these principles are brought up whenever a Catholic is criticizing a war, because they're pretty clear. They're they're easy to apply. And, like, there was a great debate that you can watch on YouTube between Phil Cly, the novelist who's Catholic. He was on the Wisdom of Crowds before, and this other priest, I forgot his name, over applying these principles to the Iran war.
Mhm.
But there is, and so everyone is saying, well, is the Pope's job just to remind you what the principles are and then you apply them, or can the Pope himself apply the principles? And you see, like, Robert Barron, the bishop, who's very active on social media as well. He's kind of famous in Catholic circles. He's saying, well, no, there is no division between Trump and the Pope, because the Pope is reminding him of the principles, but Trump, as the proper political authority that can declare war, he has to apply those principles. And, there's not really a conflict. He called it an absurd conflict between Trump and the Pope. But first of all, that's just not the case. Anyone can apply the principles as long as you have a brain. The only thing that Trump can do that we can't do
But hold on.
is declare war, right?
But to remind someone that you're not applying the principles is the same thing as criticizing. I don't even understand that line of argument.
Well, no, you're right. You're right.
Like, you're
You're
not
right,
applying
and-
the principles, i.e., you're not doing the thing.
Right.
So therefore, I don't
I'm
approve
telling
of
you
what
that you're not doing
And
the
it's
thing.
quite clear. And it's quite clear that Trump has contempt for the principles. He talks about bombing civilian infrastructure ahead of time. It's like the guy in The Hague is already filling out the paperwork before he starts. But okay, but there's that. So Vance's whole position is basically saying the Pope needs to stick to theology and not tell us how to apply the principles that he's reminding us
Right.
exist. In real life, the popes are always opine about politics, not just in the Middle Ages. But you think John Paul II wasn't opining about what's going on in Poland? You think Francis wasn't opining what was going on in Argentina? I mean, it's his prerogative. Do I, as a Catholic, have to like live according to every single utterance of the Pope on social media? No, I don't. But this Pope is reminding us of longstanding principles about war, and he's voicing his opposition to a war that I think is quite clearly, kind of started on these, not moral premises. I mean, it was, we don't have to talk about that now, but this is what I wanted to add. It's not just war theory that the popes care about. It's not just applying these abstract moral principles. What the popes also care about is world order. Okay. In 1963, I actually went and restudied this and I found a vintage
Ooh,
1963
that's a
copy of
pretty
this.
book. I like
Yeah.
that.
Pacem
Scary
in Terris
fingers, though.
means peace on earth. It was an encyclical letter, like just a letter, public letter, by Pope John the 23rd to good men of all to men of goodwill. That's how you address a letter to the whole world back then. Okay, it's to all people of goodwill, and basically what this letter says, and this is what Damir will hate, is that the human family as a whole globally has interlocking interests that now, after World War II, and with the rise of communication technology, with the rise of a globally integrated economy, this is even clearer. And that, like, human nature itself and the particular situation of humanity in the 20th century calls for global governing political authority of some sort. And the last point that this letter makes is it calls out the UN and the UN Declaration of Human Rights as the sort of representatives of this global order. Now, the Pope is not saying we should all support the UN because it is the salvation of humanity. No, what he's saying is humanity, by its very nature, is oriented towards the common good, and this common good requires a global order ultimately. And the UN seems to be what is emerging right now that's
Right.
going to protect that. And
Didn't pan out though. Like,
well, it's not over yet, and maybe
Well,
the
yeah.
Vatican is the last people that believe in
in the UN, fine. But I mean,
because by the way, global, like
But-
okay, go ahead.
all I wanted to say before we get like lost into this stuff, and I'm perfectly happy to argue all of that, but like the main question is like which American war since, I don't know, let's just say Korea, like applies to just war theory. Any of them? I was Vietnam. I don't know how the Vatican treated Vietnam, for example. Like I just would imagine
Not huge fans.
not huge fans, and I don't know, like Gulf War One. We're just discussing like Gulf War Two. Like I'm
But
just
what
saying.
I'm saying is that the
Well-
Vatican is been very negative on American war making because it sees it as destructive of the world order. That
Sure.
Yeah,
Again,
I mean, I
but
think
that's-
so.
yeah.
I mean, I think that probably all of us on this podcast right now can agree that most of the recent American adventures have not aligned with just war theory. Just looking at it now, you have principles like just cause, like war needs to be fought for a justified reason, legitimate authority, only, duly constituted authorities can declare war, right intention, so establishing peace and justice, not for, like any sort of gain, last resort, all other alternatives have to have been exhausted, and then reasonable chance of success, which lol, land war in Asia, proportionality. So,
Okay,
like many of these have been missing,
well,
but
and it's the
Go on,
legitimate
Christine,
authority.
go on. Finish your thought, but I'd just say like we'll get back to the UN. But yeah, finish
Yeah.
your thought. But
so, I mean, so yeah, American adventuring for a while now has been questionable on any number of those fronts. I think what is interesting to me in this moment about this particular interaction with the Pope in the U.S., part of it is what you say. Like, Trump is a unique figure, and I say that is like much gentler than what I think, frankly, in that he's a figure who evinces no interest in morality or moral authority, and in fact tries to both sort of pander to the interests of religious or moral people for his own gain, but is also very, very willing to immediately throw it aside when it annoys him. And so that contrast is very visible in his like weird, like the Pope made him mad, and suddenly he was willing to disrespect every possible thing about Christianity, and that was notable. And then I also think that this was interesting because this is a very particular pope in a particular moment. Um, so, past popes have been foreign, frankly. I mean, not frankly, they just were. They were foreigners. They were not from the United States. You could be like, oh, the Pope, he's from Latin America, he's from Poland, like whatever, interesting guy, but like not really our problem. And the most recent Pope, Pope Francis, said things that were very affecting to, some members of the American Catholic Church, the American populace. He was really attractive to some people, but was
Lefties.
also, yeah, but in part because he was from Latin America, was
So is
also
this one
very
technically he
well,
did
well, well,
all
well,
he did
well,
all
well,
of his
well,
work
but hang
there.
on. I mean, true, but I think that in a moment when even the sort of like the Catholic Church in the United States is beginning to see these sort of like right, left, trad, non-trad, MAGA, non-MAGA divisions, Francis was still easily dismissed as like he's Latin American, he's like partial to migrants, he has this whole thing. He's not the real Pope, said some people. We don't have to listen to him. But the new Pope, Pope Leo, solidly American, from Middle America, speaks English very clearly. In the first months of his tenure as Pope, had, I think, not ingratiated himself with, but made himself friendly to even more trad American Catholics, by, not going as far as Francis had in many directions, not speaking very directly about Donald Trump or, about other issues that might make that sort of wing of the party, of the church, um, you know, kind of upset and afraid. And I think many conservatives and conservative Catholics, I think, thought that he was a bit more on their side. So when he began to speak out first against, war fairly obliquely, and then specifically against, you know, I think the real triggering moment seemed to be Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, saying that we should all pray to Jesus Christ to bless American victory, and that Christ
He
was
read
on
Psalms. I was watching it
American.
on TV.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
read Psalms
Yeah,
in the morning
side.
briefing. That was good stuff.
Right. And I think, okay. I mean, I think that was like a maybe actually I hate to say that, Pete Hegseth triggered the Pope, but I think, that was one of the moments where suddenly the Pope started speaking much more directly against, our movement in the Iran war and the way that religion was being utilized by this administration to justify things. And that came as a surprise to people who, thought that the Pope and religion would kind of like stay out of this. And also because this particular Pope is such a legible figure. Again, English speaking from Chicago, loves sports teams, like whatever.
Hot
Um,
dogs.
hot dogs. Also became very visible, like outside of kind of the, Catholic intelligentsia, like
Yeah, he's
Catholic
the pop
Twitter.
pope.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's the
social
pop pope.
pop pope.
I
Yeah.
mean, like, actually, to be honest, like when the reason that I was like, we should do this as a podcast was that I was in an Uber. This is like the most New York Times columnist thing ever. But like, I was in an Uber talking to a friend on the phone about a piece forthcoming in the Times I was going to write about this. And my Uber driver turned around after I got off the phone and was like, I just have to say, that was so disrespectful of Donald Trump to post that photo. That was incredible. And it was insulting to think that we wouldn't recognize that he was trying to pretend to be Jesus. Like, random people have opinions on this and have opinions on the role of moral authority, on religion in the public square, on how that interacts with the Iran war. And I think that's really novel. And
So
I
can
just find that very interesting.
let me give you my best deflationary thing to build on something Santi said, and then you tell me why I'm wrong. I think in general, and I say this as someone who I haven't seen an American war in my lifetime that I've liked. I would say that even the Catholic churches, I think the thing that would be closest to liking by just war theory is the nonsense that the UN came up with, the responsibility to protect, and how that was
Hmm.
almost applied in Libya, a shit war that we shouldn't have fucking done. But like again, so I'm against responsibility to protect. I think that's also an abomination. I'm glad that that stuff is no longer like it's pretty much discredited as a thing, and no one actually believes that. But I believe it's probably the closest thing that's consonant to this just war nonsense. But so the point is here is like I'm all for the clergy warning against wars and all of that, because I think many of these things are dumb wars. And yeah, sure, for everything you said, Christine, it's correct. I think that like pop pope good, and I think you built some pop cred and all of that. But really, what we're talking about here is a particularly a war that no one even tried to justify. And I mean, you watched the New York Times, you read the New York Times thing, like Maggie Haberman's big scoop about inside the decision making of go to war. We'll put it in the show notes if you haven't. And it's just like
What decision
basically
making?
Trump's like, yeah, we're gonna do it, and it's there's nothing there. There's no like the second Iraq war is all the conspiracies about like what we were trying to do. There's not there's no even point in like trying to come up with conspiracies. It's so stupid. So the point is here, it's like none of that. I think that's unique in this, and really the unique thing, as we pointed out at the beginning of this, is that Trump just went full blasphemer. So I think that's just like easy for everyone to latch onto, and then the Pope just Pop Pope comes in and says, this is a ridiculous war, which again I think the church does frequently, and I'm glad that they do it. But then it's just like it's the juxtaposition of like Jesus Trump memeing and the Pope saying this is a bad war, and like it's kind of hard to. And I again, it just tells you something about the one hand, the power of a political movement and the cult of personality that Trump has, that this hasn't caused a bigger rupture. That people have been like, well, whatever, Trump's a blasphemer, but he's my blasphemer, and they can just like sort of like sweep it under the rug, and the stuff keeps going. But it's I don't know. I guess I'm with Santi without embracing just war theory, which I don't know. I don't really buy it, but like I think
Well,
there, in a way, there's not that much to see here, right?
but okay, 2 quick points then. One is, so one of maybe the most relevant, well, not the most relevant, but the point in just war theory about legitimate authority, that's one of the criteria for a just war, is that it has to be declared by the actual authority running the country that's fighting the war, right? So an alternative would be like if Trump raised some sort of militia in Iran and started feeding them weapons and to help
I mean, I
overthrow
think
the
he's
government of Iran.
tried.
Oh, probably or like guerrilla warfare in general. I mean, we could,
Yeah, the Kurds
Okay.
were planned. I mean,
Right,
so
right.
yes.
So the people that are defending Trump on this are saying, well, he is the legitimate authority, so he's the only one that can really understand how to apply the principles, also because he has inside knowledge.
Mhm.
The real thing here is that I think the Pope doesn't believe Trump has legitimate authority to exercise a type of humanitarian intervention that might be the best way to justify this conflict. So any sort of humanitarian right to protect intervention in the global order, according to people that believe in international law, has to be justified by the UN, right? And if you don't believe in the UN, that's fine, but that's what they believe. And instead, what this war is it just like every other thing that's happened in the last few years, it's just eroded this sort of global order that has existed at one point and is no longer existing. So I think part of the people attack the Pope because they say he sounds like a pacifist because he's denouncing every war, and then the Vatican in general has opposed. I think they even opposed the first Gulf War. The only coherent way, I mean, there's 2 ways to interpret what the Vatican is doing. One is just that they're being prophetic and they're saying, look, in the long run, we should be against all war. We should be utopian. It is kind of stupid for rational beings to be hacking and killing each other, especially as our weapons get more and more sophisticated. And that's in the Peace on Earth letter as well by John the 23rd. But two, I think it's because they see that with every one of these interventions, you're sort of cutting or you're sort of disturbing that fragile post-war global order that we sort of cobbled together after World War II. And the other thing I was going to say though about Hegseth, the fact that Hegseth was making these kind of disturbing biblical readings of the war, and they had that advertisement where they said the Lord's Prayer and all this like footage of like American weapons. Okay, I think that gave the Pope pause, and he said we have to get ahead of this and say we're against holy war.
Sure.
Okay,
Like that's not the thing we're doing.
That's not even
Yeah.
a just war question. It's just like so one of the things that Vance said is like, doesn't the Pope think that God was on the side of the people that liberated Paris against the Nazis? There's actually a really great article by a French philosopher named Jacques Maritain, a Catholic guy, written in like 1943, before it was liberated. And he said, look, the war that we're fighting against the Nazis is not a holy war, it's a just war. There's a big difference between the two. A just war is one where basically we hope God has mercy on us because we're trying to do something right, even though we know that war, even when it's justified, involves all sorts of savagery, right? A holy war is something else. A holy war is when you think God is on your side and he gives you carte blanche to do whatever the hell that you want. And so probably the Pope is saying, look, we did the Crusades. We've come a long way in saying there's no such thing as holy war. Now we're going to get ahead of it and tell this guy who has a huge platform, you're wrong.
And a big crusader
You can't invoke the
tattoo.
name of this.
Well,
That offends. Yeah, that's true. He does have a crusade, even though
well,
he's
pardon
not
my
Catholic.
ignorance. Is there an
But-
encyclical that repudiates the Crusades, like mea culpa, Crusaders bad?
There's not an encyclical, but John Paul II did say something. Yeah.
He did say that.
Yeah,
That was a mistake. Well, that's
Yeah,
wild.
I mean,
say that.
I think one of the interesting things in this whole Verkas is also just like trying to locate authority in this moment, and who has a say. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the past several decades in this moment is just like a decline in trust in institutions generally, a decline in trust in authority generally. This idea that everybody, from the president to defense contractors to whoever, has some kind of ulterior motive that they're trying to pursue. And this is, people talk about sort of foreign policy realism and, realpolitik, etc. And that's just kind of the like grim belief that we hold.
But there is no
which I
alternative.
think,
there is no
well,
ulterior motive
well-
in this war. Zero. Like, it's
well,
dumb. It is just a morons
no,
war.
I mean,
like
right.
it's like the stupidest
think-
fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's like, and honestly, this is the part that's like, like moral authority, the rest of it. Here's the long and short of it. It's a power thing. America is so powerful we can do dumb shit like this. This is the dumbest thing in my lifetime I've seen. And in a way, it's nice that Trump didn't even bother to try and justify it. It's a display of everything that we can and do. And there's speculation this is going to be our Suez. I think we're probably too powerful for this to actually bring us low like Suez did for the other empires. That's the sad actual reality of this. So moral criticism, I'm all for it. This is a dumb war. It's wasteful. Didn't need to do it, all of that. Overall, I'll go even further. I think the idea of liberating the Iranian people from their tyrannical regime would also not justify any of this nonsense. And so, the moral question of it, I guess the way I look at it, I think the Pope, because he is part of a worldly institution, even though he is, he's a pastor and has a religious role, but he is also the spokesman for a very big and very old institution in this. This is just straight up politics is what it is. Saw a great opportunity. I think saw a moral reason. I'm not saying this is all cynical on his part, but let's not also look past the fact that this is an opportunity for the church to be point to this idiocy that we're doing and look good for it. And he's a very good and charismatic guy, and he did it.
No,
Hats off
I
to
think
him.
you're right.
I mean,
By
I
the way,
think
to a certain degree, you're definitely right, because the Vatican is a global actor. It's
Yeah.
a state. I mean, it has a place in the UN. It doesn't have a vote. And if you look at the history of the popes in the 20th century, they were involved in great power politics to the extent that they could be, and they were
John
involved.
Paul's a giant in that. Again,
Right.
why the
And
conservatives loved him, because he
and
was against communism.
and Catholics were involved in the creation of the EU.
Yeah.
And I'm sure with consultation with the Vatican, like Robert Schuman. You know that John the 23rd was one of the interlocutors between Moscow and DC during the global Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you're right, though, that there is a tension between the sort of moral authority or abstract, like moral authority of the Pope, wherein he reminds us, look, we believe in the good, we believe in justice. You can't just do whatever you want with your bombs. And then the more like real world political power of the Vatican, and the Pope has to, handle both of those things in his actions, and it's probably a very difficult job. That's why they didn't pick me for it. But
You tried, though.
next
You
time.
tried.
Next
and it was.
time.
I'm glad you threw your hat in the ring, Santi.
yeah, I know. I didn't have the support. I didn't have the support of the Europeans, I think.
Yeah.
No, but so no, I don't think you're wrong, Damir. But I think that the exercise of the Vatican power is guided, not always, but is guided by a certain ideal of
Sure.
international governance.
Of course.
And it's funny because they seem to be the last believers in. I mean, you have to understand. Read Peace on Earth, okay? John the 23rd sees
Damir.
international law derived from human natural law. So from the ethics that that obtains for all human beings by virtue of their humanity, not just by revelation from God or anything.
Did the Frenchman you just mentioned,
Jacques Maritain.
Maritain,
yeah.
he
We'll
was critical in getting the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if I'm not mistaken. He was very much part of the writing of that. Am I wrong?
No,
And
you're
so
right.
and if I remember, the other part that I think is my favorite, only thing I know about him, is that like he had some essay or an aside or maybe in an interview said something along the lines of, it's like it's a real achievement for humanity, all the rest of it, but it's very good that it's so vague, because we could never actually nail down any of this stuff, and its power is in its vagary, because like the universals, I mean, more
what
or
I
less
heard
that
he
was the
said
line.
is like, don't ask us where these rights come
That's
from.
exactly that.
Everyone
Which
has
is
a
like,
different.
because as soon as, and again, the reality of hammering those out was actually a lot of horse trading and a lot of sort of stuff, and in
sort
fact,
of,
like
but they're very basic things, though.
clever lawyering by the Catholics, who are actually very strong in that whole sort of thing. I mean, as I understand it, again, this was a lot of horse trading to get it done. I think a lot of the non-Catholics, if I remember correctly, the history, were like quite befuddled by the whole thing, and the Catholics were just like ready, and they had this whole like rationale and body of reasoning to do it, and so they smuggled in a bunch of teaching and got buy-in from a lot of people by writing it very carefully. Therefore, so you get this actually political document. That's all I'm stressing here. I'm not saying it's bereft of actual Catholic moral teaching. No, the opposite. It's imbued with it, but it's smuggled in there in a way to get a bunch of heretics, if you will, to sign on to it under vague sort of like fellow feeling. And again, it's a political document of a moment in time that again, like you're right, again, created an order, but it was fashioned. It was a fashioned document that required a lot of work to get done.
Yeah,
And
I'm
that
sure
was
that
what
the
he was
signatories-
gesturing
I mean,
at.
I think like every document is fashioned. Like they don't just like appear out of thin air. I think the interesting thing to think about here, like an interesting thing, I mean, it's a thing that I am interested in thinking about, and perhaps others are too. We'll see. Is the tension or the difference in the role that the Catholic Church and the Pope play in, in conversations such as this one, in moments such as this one. Like you talk about, the Catholic Church, came with its lawyers and smuggled these definitions into our understanding of international law. And the question is, okay, why? Like what are they winning here? Like the Catholic Church is not like gaining land. Like it's not like trying to control the Strait of Hormuz or whatever. Like the Catholic Church is not going to enlist, and launch its Catholic soldiers upon the earth to try and take over other countries. Like I think the interesting and a really unusual, and it's kind of, one would think it's always been unusual, but actually it's even different from how the Catholic Church and Christendom operated in the past compared to now. Like the Catholic Church is a state actor, but in a sense, it really does stand apart from the United States, from Iran, from the EU, in that like its interests and purposes are just different. Um, and that I think is also a thing that helps, or that has made the Pope statements and the ability of, the Catholic Church and its bishops and various people to speak out in this moment really unique and compelling to people. Because I also think that, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. There is a certain, I think, tiredness and fatigue with just like the politicking and the horse trading, and like everyone's out to get something in this
I
moment in
well,
time. Like the institutions that are supposed to be like serving the people are they're out for something, and no one like believes that they're sort of benevolent, in any sense. And I think there is still, you know, for whatever reason, um, somewhere, this kernel of a sense that like the Pope is not like getting that much from doing this. Like he's not really like making money, um, from opposing Trump on Truth Social. And that's so different from the moment that we've been existing in for a while, where truly like, especially under Trump, everyone's out for something. Everyone is out to get something. That it feels very distinctive, and it's like a particularly distinctive kind of position to be operating in this moment.
I'll grant you all that. Just to caveat, I mean, yes, how many divisions had the Pope? Quoth, what was that, Stalin, right? But
Um,
like, so
how
sure,
many divisions does the Pope have?
right. And so it's true in the 20th century. I just don't want to like brush aside centuries of the reality of the papacy and the
For
fact that
sure.
that was in fact a worldly actor
Yeah.
that and if you want to
But
be
it's kind of
like
chilled out
if you want
recently, for
yeah,
better
okay,
or
but
worse.
again, I just don't want to like
But
lose sight of this.
and to
And
Demir's point, by the way, I mean the Vatican could say, I mean the Pope could say, "Hey, we give up the Vatican, we give up our state. We are just going to be paupers in Rome." But they don't, right? They at the end of the day, they still have their little state. They have a treaty with Italy that does you know for their defense, and that sort of sovereignty, the church in its infinite wisdom has decided that it needs it. So you're right that it hasn't completely given up the idea of worldly power or of some sort of sovereignty to defend its institutions. Um,
and I
and
mean,
this is the thing though, like I this is how I see it. The Catholic, the church has always had a vision of global governance. After the Emperor of Rome converted, there was a sense in which Rome itself ruled the world, and the emperor was Catholic, so it was fine. After the crumbling and the fragmentation of that order, there was still Catholicism as the common faith of Europe, and everyone else was just seen as the other. But with the advent of the sort of post-Enlightenment secular West, the papacy and the church needs to develop its idea of what global governance might mean, and what it's developed is what I've been talking about today. But what I'm interested in is the position of those Catholics that supported, like the old neocon Catholics, basically, because they have an interesting position right now. Because I don't remember Bush that well. You tell me, Demir. But it seems like those neocons were for and against international law or global order, because they invaded in the name of enforcing human rights and sort of universal ideas, right? And a common neocon trope is that the United States is the only enforcer of human rights in the world. That the UN does nothing. But at the same time, Bush pulled out of a lot of treaties like ABM Treaty and the Kyoto Protocol, and then there was like Krauthammer's idea of the unipolar moment, that the U.S. would sort of dominate the world and create some sort of international order that way. So if you're a Catholic neocon like George Weigel, who's the only one that's still alive today, he recently wrote a column in your paper. And he said, the lamentable thing about this war with Iran is that no one's serious about discussing just war theory principles. But my question for him is, presumably Weigel believes in global order of some sort or another because he's Catholic. And he's much smarter than I am, and he's read this Peace on Earth text. But at the same time, he must know that this war is destroying the remnants of global order. So what is the next global order that he supports? What does he hope is being built by this?
So is he actually in support? He's not in support of this war, though.
I don't
right?
know. I couldn't tell what that article was saying, but
I,
there are other Catholic neocons are for it, like Francis Meyer wrote in First Things the other day. Like, there's a sense in which Trump's recklessness is just about destroying. It's just about getting your way and having some sort of U.S. regional hegemony and dividing up the world with the other global powers.
It is
right?
about ushering in like this moment of power above all. Yeah.
But what is it? But there are some people that think that a global order will emerge from this.
So let me tackle this a couple of ways. I'm not going to speak for any one position or the other. I'll just tar with a nasty wide brush and people will be upset. But I'd say that it's a common American secular faith that comes from America's, I think, deep Christian roots, about providence and this country's role in the world. And I think, especially after the Cold War, so for that generation of neoconservatives, it was just axiomatic that America is justice. I think that's I'm conflating a lot and compressing a lot, but I don't think it's false in very broad brushes. And so part of that continues.
So it's another unipolar moment. Extend the
unipolar moment. Also, America good and America fighting for justice one way or the other. America, even through its failures, is still the good. Now, look, here's where I would even come out on this. I think that what I push back again on what you've been saying again is what order are we talking about? Is the order that we built a moral order, or was it a order that existed because of a nuclear standoff between two world destroying powers? One fell off, and then you had another order that was shepherded by America that has been actually degrading since 1991. Maybe you can do it a different way. Said maybe it had its peak ahead of 9/11 and 2001, and it's been downhill ever since then. I would agree with all of that. I would say this is reckless and it's doing this, but I also do think that from just broad kind of power considerations, given how still massive the United States is and all the advantages we have, yeah, I do think some kind of new order is going to come out of this. Just note that I don't moralize about it one way or the other. I don't think what we're doing is ipso facto good. I don't think justice is being born from what we're doing here, and I just prefer we do a lot less of it. But I do think a new order is going to come out of this on the other side, just by the nature of things.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is I think the sort of Catholic neocon argument would have been similar to yours, is that whatever global order we have had since World War II is in large part because of the United States, and so Weigel
they just glom on the justice part, right? That America's just, and therefore the order was good.
Weigel is very critical, for example, of Ostpolitik, which was the Vatican branching out towards the East and all this stuff. And maybe there is something to that. I think people blame also the Vatican for being too critical of the U.S. But before 1989, it was very critical of the USSR. I think the Vatican is just critical of whatever great power they see as wrecking whatever fragile order it could have been established. But what you're saying is that you need one of the big powers to establish the order. There's no such thing as a sort of
Well, and I think where we're
general
headed
order.
is like we're headed to a part of like relative power is shifting. I mean, I think that's obviously true that the ability of the United States to hold down the entire world is in question. I mean, there's the thing that, what's his name? Oh, I can't remember it right now. Mid-century writer talked about strategic insolvency, like the big worry that like we're overextended. And I mean,
Mm.
arguably, that's what Trump is worried about, and that's why he is keen to carve up the world in spheres of influence. Whether he's right or not about that, I mean, remains to be seen. I think he may end up proving his case because this was a reckless and stupid
By
thing that
doing it.
cost us by doing it. And anyway, like those are all very complex questions, and I would just say though, again, to your question about this, and I mean also reacting to what you're saying, Christine, about like the quest for moral clarity and the rest of that. Yeah, I do think people want that. I think it's a very confusing time. It's getting increasingly confusing. There's a real thirst for that. I don't mean to therefore say anything cynical about the fact, but again, I think the Pope sees an opportunity here, and it's like insofar as that the church wants converts, and you'd want like a high profile fight where you come out smelling like roses while the other side is just, smearing shit all over itself. Why the hell not? Go for it. So, souls. He's getting souls for the church. Great PR move. Go Pope. And yeah, there's a thirst for this. Now I know, like maybe this is too profane that you guys put it that way, but I think we more or less agree on that. No,
I mean, the Pope's out there harvesting,
harvesting, yeah,
as
the
he's
soul
supposed to do,
harvester.
is
shepherding,
that what's
um,
harvesting? Is that like a
harvesting
new thing that
souls.
Gen Z says? Oh, okay.
No,
No,
no, I
no,
said it.
no,
I
it's
said
from
it.
the
It was
Bible. Which, as a convert, I understand that, cradle Catholics may not read as much,
that's
but
true. I don't. Yeah.
it's
I
out there.
learn everything I know about the Bible. I know from my wife.
Secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think you're right, Demir. That yeah, we're gonna, I guess, see where these powers shake out. I mean, again, I think I'm almost like less interested in the. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna see what happens. I think I'm interested again, still in these sort of almost interpersonal relationships, or like alliances or non-alliances that we're seeing show up and be either clarified or questioned in this moment. Like Santi, you're talking about, how sort of Catholic neocons are squaring the circle here. Um, and I feel like this moment is also interesting to me because it's one in which, you know, the sort of like joke on weird Catholic Twitter and in some ways like post-liberal Twitter that, JD Vance was part of and Adrian Vermeule and all these guys was like repent and submit to the Pope. Like that's what America needs to do. And like all
Oh
of a
my
sudden the
God.
Pope is
I
saying
really hated
things.
that when people would
I
tweet
know
that.
it
That
was
was so
super annoying.
embarrassing.
It was embarrassing, but also it's kind of funny that like suddenly the Pope is saying things and JD Vance is not like aggressively not repenting and submitting to the Pope. And like it's even these neocons who are at least less shameless perhaps are still trying to sort of figure out a way to thread the needle between being like faithful Catholics and then also like having their Pope contrary opinions on what this war should look like. And it both kind of like it raises the old specter of like, the worry that temporal authorities in the United States would secretly, you know, have allegiance to the Vatican. And also like that's one
That's why
negative way of
Kennedy and
looking at
Biden
it.
were dangerous
Right.
presidents,
uh yeah.
letting
But
papists into the.
also a question of like, when push comes to shove, you've seen these political figures, I think of Vance especially, sort of weaponizing this idea of like, well, I'm really Christian, like I'm really Catholic, and that's why you should support me. And then when it comes to being Catholic, which is to say, like, aligning with church teaching or like what the literal Pope tells you, versus defending Donald Trump's frankly like insane and totally unjustifiable. Like, it's clear, as Demir was saying, like it doesn't make any sense. There's nothing to defend here. But sort of kneeling at the feet of their master, as it
But
were,
but again,
to move forward. Like, there's tension. I just find it interesting. I'm just saying, that is a thing that I find interesting about this moment too. Like, seeing these sort of, which is the real alliance and which was sort of a useful allegiance that's going to be discarded in certain moments. Like, who has real authority for
well,
these
but
leaders in this moment?
But that I just want to push back on that one too, right? I mean, that's why I focused on the fact. What's funny to me about JD is that like he went from Protestantism and then like from first principles rediscovered Protestantism, which is just like again busybodies in
Okay,
Rome.
but no,
This is like
no,
literally.
Demir, I
But
think
hold
it's
on, let me just say one thing, Santi, and then I'll give it to you because like, but the reality is what Christine, you're talking about, like earthly authority versus temporal authority. You didn't need the Reformation for that problem. I mean, like the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope, like this was always a thing, and it was always, and you want to go watch a bodice ripper, I don't know, it was like AMC or whatever, watch the Borgias and whatever all that stuff goes, which is just basically
Demir.
palace intrigue. It's palace intrigue, and this is back when Rome was an actual earthly power, like that is to say a as potentially corrupt as any other state and doing the filth that is politics. But it's what I'm saying is just like that tension between dominion and earthly realms and the eternal and the kingdom of heaven and the mandates and all this. Like, I mean, this was always hidden over like layers of of language and euphemism and all sorts of things. And basically, earthly leaders said that they were, in agreement, but then behind doors and all the rest of that. I mean, it's like the song and dance of medieval politics, and up until the Reformation was defined by these sorts of tensions, right? I mean,
We back.
okay,
Santi,
but
like,
let me just say, I
yeah.
mean, look, the problem is not that JD Vance like disagrees with the Pope. I can disagree with the Pope on a lot of things. Like, if the Pope says we need to have a billionaire tax, and somebody's like, well, no, we shouldn't have a billionaire tax. That's fine. You can disagree on something like that. The one thing that as a Catholic you're bound to believe in is that, Catholic social teaching has been pretty clear that we believe in redistribution of wealth, that we don't believe in like sort of like old classical liberalism in the economy, right? But you can disagree on the means, So, if Vance was like, well, I think the Pope is too much on the left and on this or that topic, that's fine. You might disagree with him, but that's fine. But the problem with this is that this war is obviously just like, as you say yourself, been started without any sort of pretense to moral justification. Not only that, but on top of that, you have Hegseth giving it some sort of divine mandate, pretending like God wants us to fight this war. And Vance, who is a smart guy, pretending like none of this is the case. And like Christine says, before that, he had always been lecturing us on how he's this great Christian leader, and now he just has. So I don't know if I'm in Vance's position, what do I do? Well, maybe resign is the only thing he can do. But he's not doing that.
Like,
but he's vice president. He can't be quiet.
Pull a Marco Rubio and just be like,
plenty.
I'm not part of
True.
it. Like, I don't
Well,
have anything to
that's
just
the
wanna
say.
other
say, though-
interesting thing, though, because I don't like Ross Dow that tweeted this. He's like, there might be. What if there's a couple of Catholics in the administration that secretly disagree with this war? What should they do?
He tweeted
Bishop
that. He
Barron?
said no, but like, but again, but
well,
let's,
that's a good question.
But hold on, Santi. Like again, let's not paper over literally the history of like since basically since Christ, like political history since then. You've had plenty of believing Christians in realms of power that did worldly things and stayed in power and clung to power. This is nothing new. I mean, like you're asking some sort of like saintly behavior here.
No,
Like maybe.
okay. Well,
like,
yes and no.
resign?
Okay,
Are
so,
you kidding me?
So
Like,
part of the idea of salvation history is that there is a sort of progress of moral awareness. There's not progress in the way that, like John Stuart Mill talked about progress, where we create utopia on Earth, maybe, but there is a greater moral awareness today than there was 1,000 years ago within the church and hopefully humanity as a whole. I think we like to think that. So,
You'd
for
like to
example,
think that, yeah.
when we say, you know, we no longer believe in holy war, but we did in the year 1000 when the Crusaders took Jerusalem. You know, that is progress of moral awareness. So yes,
Yeah.
and there's also, you know, so
Yeah, I
should
suppose
we
I just don't
expect?
buy that, but like, yeah, sure. Like,
But
if
there is
that's a core.
well, I
Hmm.
mean, there's awareness.
I don't believe that like the moral empathy circle has actually expanded that much. I think that's actually one of my first principles, sort of like axiomatically. I just don't buy it. That's why I think we keep going back to this thing. People throw Steven Pinker in my face and et cetera, et cetera. But I think like Singer and Pinker are fools, and I just don't see it.
Damir's
but,
first
but
principle
even
is being
beyond
a
what you're
huge
saying, though, like
bummer.
Vance, if he wants to stay, Vance also told us that he was against wars in the Middle East. When Russia got invaded Ukraine, he famously said, "I don't care about what's happening in Ukraine. I care what's happening in Ohio."
Yeah.
You know, so you know, it's also his own. He's fighting against his own past, not just against the
Right.
Pope.
He has
here.
a whole book coming out next month about how much he presumably loves the Catholic Church and the Pope. So, going to be a bit
Gonna be good.
awkward.
But look, I mean,
Must read.
I don't also want to sound like I'm telling people who's a good or bad Christian. Judge Vance by his own previous words. Just, I mean, this isn't. But also, just this war is just.
It's
the
just
war is a
stupid.
public project that's killing a lot of people. It's.
I think what Ross was alluding to is that I think it's pretty clear that there's a cadre of people, and I don't know if I'd include Rubio. Though Rubio has gone conspicuously silent
Yeah,
since
that was
the
odd,
war
yeah.
kicked
Which
off.
was wise
but it
for
is. I mean,
him.
what Ross is talking about, and he would know. It's that like JD is unhappy with this war, and I think that's not actually all that mysterious. You can pretty much see it, and you know, again, it's.
I really think he could have handled the Pope thing differently then. If he
He
was
could
really
have
that
just
unhappy.
again, like so many people in this administration over the past couple of years, he could have just sat down and eaten his food and not entered into this.
I think he was given orders. I
I
think he was given direct orders by the
I think
president.
he was absolutely sent out front.
Yep.
And
He's
you know,
like,
that's what happens
JD,
when
you
you
love-
sign up to be vice president.
That's right, and especially, I mean, again, that's exactly right. And
But I think
again,
you have to resign at this point. Like, okay,
I
we
don't know.
I don't
killed
think
a
he could
bunch
have
of kids in a
resigned, but-
hospital in Tehran, and the first thing the Trump does is lie about it.
That's not
There's-
new. Please,
I know.
like, there's
but, like,
actually
there's
that
so
happened in the
many
first Gulf
points in
War.
which
That happened literally in the first Gulf War. I think I forget. I looked this up at the beginning of it. I mean, and we lied about it. I think we still haven't come clean about it, like
No,
fully.
really?
Maybe there was an investigation,
Yeah,
but there was
Trump
like a.
is just, like,
There's
so
also
what was it?
disgustingly shameless
flagrant.
about it. Like, you know, yeah, flagrant. Just
Again,
disrespectful at this point.
No,
like,
I
if you're going to
agree.
kill
I
a
agree
million
that the
kids,
U.S. has
at
committed
least
war
like be
crimes
a
before.
little sad.
But more
I'm
and
saying,
more
you
like
know,
we
within
lied
the
about it.
context of Vance's personal situation here.
I'm not.
There's a lot of points in which you just have to call it.
You know, hypocrisy is a tribute, vice pays to virtue. Like I say this all the time.
It's
And
like
like,
what
at
Shadi
least
says,
just
too.
at least just pretend to care. You know, just give just a little something, a little sop to the idea that America, its president, its administration has some kind of moral sense or attitude, some responsibility towards humanity, some responsibility towards
no.
its own citizens. No, I mean, we don't, I guess, clearly, but like, just, you know, just pretend.
Here,
That would
as
have
we
been, I
wrap-
think that would have been enough. And
As we wrap,
Trump
let me
cannot
just
even
say-
do that.
Let me say one thing to scandalize you both as we come to the end here. Like, honestly, I think, you know, I think I've said my piece about how idiotic this war is for all sorts of things. In a way, I still revel at the fact that at how unsentimental and, quite frankly, honest Trump is about everything. You know, my favorite one of like this week was, I think it was yesterday. Some journalist asked him, was like, so you say that, like, you know, you boarded that ship and the Chinese are sending weapons to Iran. Like, are you upset? Are you like pissed off about this? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's not like we don't do the same thing elsewhere. And that's Trump for you, basically. It's just like he is unsentimental. I think he walked into this thing out of hubris. I think he's more self-aware than we give him credit for. I think he realizes that at this point. It's like, whoops. I think he had weird ideas. He was like, after Venezuela, I think quite frankly, after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, since then, I think he's had some sort of belief of really having the mandate of heaven. And he's just been gambling recklessly ever since then. And I can't help but
I
think,
mean, if he had the mandate of Kevin, he's lost it after that blasphemous tweet.
well, no, for
Yeah.
sure.
It's
But
over.
it's,
Not,
It's
wait,
over.
but Demir, quick question.
but he's
though.
not
Do you
Christian.
think-
I mean, like, whatever. Trump is
do you
just
think
whatever.
do you think the Leo is being? If you just said Trump is not sentimental, and there is something, when he just talks about realpolitik, it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
we send them weapons, they send us weapons.
Yeah.
But do you think the Pope is being sentimental?
What do you mean sentimental?
Well, what do you mean?
What do you
sentimental? I don't know how to
mean?
use the word.
I mean, I think that I mean, the church, I guess I should have said this earlier, right? Like, I mean, when I was talking about like it's like power moves here, I think that's like one lens to look at. It doesn't mean that like all the church's teachings are cynical or that they don't believe in them. The only criticism I have of it is this idea that if the church's teachings were, I don't know, accepted, that like humanity can be transformed and like actually the world can be improved. That's the part I disagree with. So I think like the sort of metaphysics and or like geopolitics of the church, insofar as that they believe that their teachings are not about like saving souls, but in fact of reforming humanity here on earth, I think that's naive.
Wait, can I read you?
really,
Okay, wait.
and I
Can I read
really
you a
am against
quote?
that. I think.
Can I read you a quote from what the Pope said on Palm Sunday,
Sure,
and you tell me if it's sentimental or not?
go for it.
Oh, I love this.
5 being very sentimental, 1 being like Trump, basically. Jesus does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them, saying, "Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen to you. Your hands are full of blood."
Yeah, it's good stuff. But again, instantiate
Wait,
that
no,
to
five
world peace,
to
though.
1.
No, but that's good stuff. That's a good quote. But instantiate that to like actually a broader geopolitics. And again, I think
Whoa,
even
but
even
wait,
even no
Trump
again,
also doesn't have a broader geopolitics. He's just doing
sure,
whatever.
but again, like the main thing is here though. It's like I was saying from the beginning, I'm every time the church speaks out against our stupid wars, I'm on board. It's what Christine's sort of gesturing at is just like, the bigger hopefulness that I'm also against, which is to say, that like, this is what we're thirsting for in this era of like deep cynicism and Trump and the rest of that. I'll just point out that like it's this deep hopefulness for the, reformation, not wrong word, but like of the transformation of humanity that I think overcame far too many of our best and brightest after the end of the Cold War, which was this idea that we are going to now change the world for the better. When in fact, it was, I think, reasonably clear that humanity is still this broken mess that it always was. And as again, sort of order, whether our order was better than competing orders, I happen to believe that, materially better, all sorts of ways, like the way it was administered, the rest of it. I prefer it to communism, to global communism, certainly global fascism. But nevertheless, this idea that the world is going to be improved and made more moral, I think even that delusion is bad. I think it's the church's teachings are I think a very good criticism, and I think they appeal to a certain thing that I think mobilizes people against the kind of folly that we're in right now. I'm all for that. I just don't think that as a positive statement for transforming the world, I'm against it.
So, what I'm hearing here, Demir, is that you do, in fact, perhaps believe in the doctrine of original sin, and that humans are just kind of flawed and are
Yeah, sure.
not improving. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm into that.
interesting. Well,
Maybe that's the note, Santi.
Maybe that's our final note. Maybe
No,
that's.
that's depressing.
I mean,
Come on. Come on, people. Be more. End on something
I
happier.
think it's really.
Well, do you think that?
I don't
I
think.
mean,
I
do you
don't
think
think
that
the.
humans
Don't ask
can?
me. Just tell me why
If
I'm
you
wrong,
read
and we'll
Peace
end on
on
that.
Earth, if you read Peace on Earth, I don't think
I'll
it's
do
it's a
that.
Rousseauvian work where
Mm.
people think that human beings are perfectible.
Okay, I'll read that.
Because there's also a left critique of Catholics for being too sort of, they believe that all human things end up in tragedy, that there is no utopia on earth, that ultimately salvation history ends with a sort of cataclysm before the second coming.
Right.
I
That's
think
right.
there was an interesting article by a guy I went to grad school with in Commonweal a few weeks ago where the title was "Things Will Get Better Before They Get Worse." That's the sort of historical understanding of Christianity. So, I just think that where you do differ from Pope Leo and his predecessors is probably that they believe in some sort of global political order that's derivable from human nature, that there is a sort of inclination towards the good that's been compromised by original sin, but is still there, and it's enough to create some sort of, and there's a pressing need for it.
Mm-hmm.
After
Yeah,
World
I
War
don't
II.
think that humans are perfectible, but I do think that they can be worse or better, and we we could be better, even if not
Yeah.
perfect. But more theological discussions with Demir in future episodes.
I won't take the bait, and let's
No,
let's wrap on that happiness because we'll be here another
Yeah.
hour.
On
All
that
right,
happy
guys.
note,
All right,
Pleasure as
it's
always.
great to be back, guys. Peace.
Yeah. Stay,
Peace.
stay, peace on earth. All right.